All right, so my name is MINAL Patel Davis. I'm the Special Advisor to the Mayor on Human Trafficking. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's private screening and panel discussion of Trafficked, and I'd like to specifically welcome our first daughter who's here with us today, Ashley Turner. Thanks for being here. It's very special that you're here, so thank you. I'd also like to thank Dina Gyro and Chris Graves, who work tirelessly every day with me to accelerate the work of this office. I could not be luckier, so I'm so happy for that. Thank you guys. I see you over there. I have the honor and privilege today of introducing Mayor Sylvester Turner. Mayor Turner's commitment to fighting human trafficking is part of his much larger commitment to stand for the most vulnerable in Houston. He himself was born and raised in Acres Homes as one of 9 children in a 2-bedroom home. When he was 13, his father succumbed to cancer. His mother then took charge of the household. After graduating from Harvard Law School, he returned to Houston and advocated for his district for 26 years in the state legislature. Since his election as mayor of Houston, the 4th largest city in the United States, we have seen how his commitment to his constituents is rivaled only by his remarkable ability, simply put, to get things done. He has improved roads through his pothole initiative, closed a $160 million budget shortfall, and developed points of understanding to reform the municipal pension system. Pension governing bodies and boards have put $2.5 billion in concessions on the table. At the same time, the mayor's office has developed a municipal-level plan to fight human trafficking at scale. As a result, Mayor Turner has turned Houston into the anti-human trafficking model for cities across the United States. And all this in less than a year since he took office. Please join me in welcoming Mayor Turner.
And look, before I make these comments, if you would join me, if you don't mind, in thanking and acknowledging MINAL for the work that she has done in this effort against human trafficking. And MINAL has done a terrific job, and I'm very, very proud of her. Let me also acknowledge, I believe the Congresswoman is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee, still present. I know she was with us earlier, but I certainly want to acknowledge her. And then we have the Mayor Pro Tem that's here, Ellen Cohen. Thank you for being here. Councilmember Jack Christie, Councilmember Cisneros, Councilmember Brenda Stardick, and Councilmember Robert Gallegos. And Chief Martha Montalvo is also here. Chief, where are you? Thank you, MINAL. I'd like to also welcome everyone to this evening's screening of Trafficked. Houston is, well, let me back up. Let me also acknowledge my daughter who is here, and I would say looking quite well, quite nice tonight, Ashley Paige Turner. Houston is one location chosen as part of a series of private screenings, which includes a congressional screening in Washington, D.C., one for Parliament in the United Kingdom, and a United Nations screening in both New York and Geneva, Switzerland. Inspired by true events, Trafficked unflinchingly depicts the drama of human trafficking, and though a dramatic feature of film, it is authentic to its source material. I expect tonight to broaden our understanding of human trafficking, its economic impact, and how it manifests itself around the globe and in communities across the United States. Tonight's audience is composed of a broad-based spectrum of leaders from across Houston and Texas. In attendance, we have the governor's office, council members, members of my task force, law enforcement, social service agencies, private businesses, healthcare professionals, and faith-based groups. Each of you plays an indispensable role in transforming Houston into a solution center when it comes to this particular issue. We are honored to have Ann Archer and Patrick Duffy with us here, both stars from tonight's film, along with other notable film VIPs. We're also pleased that SIDDHARTH Kara and Ann Chandler are joining us as well. If you'll acknowledge all of them, thank you so very much for being here. SIDDHARTH is an internationally recognized expert on human trafficking, and he is both the writer and producer of Trafficked, and is the longtime local leader and the executive director of TAHRTH Justice Center. Raising awareness through tonight's event is just one example of my anti-human trafficking strategic plan in action. Houston is leading efforts among U.S. cities on this issue. The plan is the first comprehensive municipal level response developed by a major U.S. city. Traditional government responses often include much needed federal, state, county, and local law enforcement efforts. Houston is proud to contribute its own unique, multifaceted approach to existing efforts, and our plan advances a series of actionable objectives, and I want to thank MINAL for developing and providing leadership to it. For the first objective, we are undertaking institutional changes to unify the city's response. This objective is advanced both through policy advocacy and by implementing employee training at scale. Our health department employees who inspect Houston's more than 13,000 restaurants or food establishments are being trained on how to detect labor trafficking. The larger public also needs to watch for signs of human trafficking on a day-by-day basis, which informs our second objective. To maximize our reach, but also to create a savvy media campaign, we engaged with several private partners. We officially launched Watch for Traffic on August 22nd. By making as many media impressions as possible, we ultimately hope to increase tip reporting. Not only are we raising awareness in the general public, we are also, as part of our third objective, enhancing direct victim outreach efforts. In developing outreach materials, we had to be especially attuned to the irregular migration patterns in Houston and the Gulf region. As a result, we have developed and translated palm-sized outreach cards with intake-style questions that are tailored by the industry in which the victims are found, such as cantinas, food establishments, and illicit massage establishments. By strategically disseminating cards through our distribution networks, we aim to increase victim identification. As with each objective I have discussed, partnerships are essential to enhancing our anti-human trafficking efforts. To better coordinate citywide efforts, I convened the Houston Area Council on Human Trafficking, a multidisciplinary task force whose work is the basis of the fourth objective. The task force has consistently proven itself as an incubator for creative ideas, and I would like to personally thank all of its members in attendance tonight. Lastly, before we begin the screening, I would like to say a few words to prepare you for the content of Trafficked. Human trafficking is a vicious, brutal crime that inflicts trauma on victims, and it is this reality that Trafficked depicts. Its content is difficult to watch, and particular scenes will no doubt elicit strong emotions. Each of us will feel unsettled during the course of the film. It is my hope that such feelings will motivate us to better understand human trafficking and its different facets. Houston has been known as the hub for human trafficking, but I believe starting tonight and even before, if we work together and in collaboration, that we can reverse that and turn it around, and we can stop human trafficking right here in the city of Houston and the surrounding region. Let's work together and let's make this happen.
At this time, I would like to ask our panelists to join us on stage as I introduce them. For more in-depth bios, just refer to your programs. We're going to move into the moderated portion of the event after we've given SIDDHARTH a few minutes to make a few comments. So Ann Archer is an Academy Award nominated actress and has starred opposite to some of Hollywood's most respected leading men. She's also a tireless advocate for human rights through her nonprofit, Artists for Human Rights. There's no need to hold your applause, by the way, so thank you, Ann, for being here. Patrick Duffy is a celebrated actor who's captivated audiences for over 30 years. He has starred in some of the most memorable and best-loved series, including Dallas, The Bold and the Beautiful, and Step by Step. Thanks for being here. Ann Chandler is the Executive Director of TAHRTH Justice Center's Houston office. TAHRTH is a national nonprofit organization that protects courageous immigrant women and children who refuse to be victims of violence. Ann is also a member of the Mayor's Task Force. SIDDHARTH, the director of the Carr Center Program on Human Trafficking and Modern Slavery at the Harvard Kennedy School. He is both the writer and the producer of Trafficked, which is based on his book, Sex Trafficking, Inside the Business of Modern-Day Slavery. And with just a little change in the program, we're going to give him just a few minutes to address us. SIDDHARTH, please go ahead. Thank you.
Good evening. Just a few prefacing remarks before our panel discussion. On behalf of the cast and crew of Trafficked, I would like to offer my sincere thanks to Mayor Sylvester Turner, Vice Mayor Pro Tem Ellen Cohen, Houston First, the Texas Film Commission, the Stardust Fund, and of course my friend and colleague MINAL Davis for their support in hosting us this evening. The purpose of the film you have just seen is to take you on an authentic journey into the world of human trafficking in order to raise awareness of some of the very challenging and painful truths of this issue, including the fact that it takes place right here in the United States. As an academic, I must tell you that equally important to raising awareness is the pressing need to conduct research into the scale and function of human trafficking in every city, state, region, and country around the world. The importance of this research cannot be overstated, especially here in the United States, where we still have very little sense of just how extensive slavery and human trafficking are. In short, how can we abolish that which we do not know and understand? Now, most every person in this country who's raised in this country learns of this nation's history with slavery. We learn of one of the most ambitious human trafficking operations in history, the transatlantic slave trade that trafficked over 11 million Africans to be slaves in the Americas. We also learn of the very brave campaign to eradicate slavery, inspired by similar movements in Europe, that culminated here in 1865 with the passage of the 13th Amendment. The truth is, as you have seen tonight, the 13th Amendment was not the end. It was just the beginning. As slavery persists in various forms in the United States and around the world, more perniciously, in ways more perniciously than anyone cares to recognize. Slavery touches our lives each and every day, from the food we eat, to the clothes we wear, to the smartphones in our hands, and of course, to the women and children raped for profit by our neighbors, co-workers, and friends. Abraham Lincoln once said, "If slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong." And I think he said this because slavery is an utterly dehumanizing violation that strips a person of everything that makes him or her fundamentally human: our dignity, our freedom, and control over our very bodies. Contemporary anti-slavery efforts are in dire need of elevated support, resources, and energy. And for that, I sincerely and personally thank each of you for being here this evening. And I hope that this film might inspire some of you to join efforts to finish the work that was commenced in this country in 1865 and help rid slavery from the world once and for all. Thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
All right, so it is time for the moderated discussion. I think we'll have to start with, of course, Ann Archer and Patrick. We have two Anns, so this is going to be a lot of fun. So Ann and Patrick, and we'll let Ann go first. I'd like to ask you both, did participating in the film have a personal impact on either of you? And was there something that you learned that surprised you?
Well, I think I had some awareness of human trafficking because my organization has done many events dealing with this issue, and that's how I got to know SIDDHARTH in the first place. But I didn't really understand the large scale of it and what we confront just to even make a dent in it. And what I think is so important about this film is that so many movies in Hollywood make some prostitution either seem okay or it's the victim's fault. They're not a victim, but they're a prostitute. and it doesn't really paint the true picture. And if you do a documentary, it's all good and well, but you don't get a very large audience. And I think that thing that SIDDHARTH did that is so, so smart is that he took real stories that he knows from all of his research and study and put them into a dramatic form to make a dramatic story where you can be on the edge of your seat, where you can feel the emotions that these girls have really gone through. And I think it will attract a lot of attention and create hopefully a wide audience for this movie, because through the arts we can actually reach people and change hearts and minds overnight. And that's what he has accomplished. It's a huge accomplishment to be able to put this film together, both SIDDHARTH and Conroy Cantor and everyone that's been involved in this film. It's really amazing what they've accomplished, and I think that's what I hope. I hope a lot of people will see it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. Do you want to take a minute and answer the same question?
Yeah, like what she said. It's a difficult subject matter, and I was not aware, other than just intellectually cognizant, that it existed until I got this job, until I read the script, until I read SIDDHARTH's book. The interesting thing is, and when you watch the movie, and thank goodness it ended on the note that it ended, but there's a double edge to that, and this is not blaming anybody for a scene of mine that was cut, SIDDHARTH, but I was thankful that the film ended the way it did, because we need to have hope in order to have encouragement to move forward. But in that script was also the reality, which was then, it just wasn't appropriate to keep in the film, where the character I played gets away with it. There's a scene of him just having overcome all of that, being arrested, everything. He sells his partner with the cowboy hat down the river, and it's business as usual. And what we have to realize is we have to blend that inspiration that causes us to move forward with the realization that it's a very difficult job, and the people to your, not to your right and left, but in society to our right and left, are potentially those people in this film that are getting away with it, and that's the job ahead of us. My wife said just this morning when I was talking to her, she said, all bad guys don't have mustaches and silly laughs, and it's true, which is why I was so glad when I got this part that I played the part that I did. You don't expect my character to be that person until, in fact, he is. So we have a job. I wouldn't call it a war to wage, unless it's an internal war where all of us have to assume responsibility for the reality of our environment. And if we do, there's nothing we can't accomplish. If we now start to look to our right and left and see a victim and react appropriately with the mayor's list of different things that you can do when you see circumstances like this in your environment, we can make a fundamental change, a shift. The butterfly effect is a real effect, and it can have a rippling, responsible effect to our environment. And we hope over the course of the many airings of this film that we ring that bell that will never go silent in your head ever again.
Wonderful. I actually have follow-up questions for both of you on your organization and the character you played, but first we'll ask SIDDHARTH. This is actually a pre-selected audience question. So SIDDHARTH, this is for you. The movie was inspired by true events. Are you able to talk about the parts of the film with which you took creative license?
First, let me apologize to Patrick for that small scene that was cut. It was very painful to lose more screen time with you. But he's right. It was an important element where you see that ultimately the power structure persists. And I think you get that sense still when you see Mali, the Nigerian, still on the street, that this thing persists and goes on. Sorry. Question on the actual veracity. Most every character you see in this film, most every scenario that plays out in this film is based on something that I've actually documented. Now, where the creative license takes place is in weaving it together into one story. So certain things had to be fictionalized in order to try to get as much of a human trafficking, global human trafficking story on screen in 1 hour and 40 minutes. And that required a little bit of creative license, and a little bit of tweaking and sort of amalgamating certain elements and characters, switching geographies a little bit, things like that. But the essence and the core of the characters and what they endure and the truths that they represent, in particular the three young main women, Sarah, the foster care child from California, Amba, the young woman from India, and Mali, the Nigerian peasant, you know, they all, the three of them as a collective, I think, are the face of human trafficking. No one story can tell you everything you need to know, but the three of them together, how they enter this world in three different ways. One is abducted, one is tricked, and one makes a quote-unquote choice. There are three responses to it. One fights back because she's got to get back to her little sister. One accepts because what other life is available to her. And then one is utterly shattered, which is the three kind of archetypal responses to being trafficked and enslaved and rendered like chattel and property, as happens to these women. So the truth of the characters represents the truth of the issue, and certain things, of course, had to be tweaked and fictionalized to get a reasonable story that had a few riveting elements up on screen.
Thank you. And Ann Chandler's here with us tonight. Many of us in the room know her. And we did have an additional panelist, survivor advocate, that was booked and had a conflict, couldn't be here tonight. But I am wondering if you're able to share the story of one of the clients you've represented in the past, so that the movie really hits home and none of us have an excuse to think, despite after everything we say, that this is a Hollywood feature film, not true and can be easily dismissed.
So I'm afraid my voice is going to be a little wavery. I was deeply impacted by that voice, by the movie, by many voices I saw. I thought of one client who was one time caught by law enforcement, and a very sympathetic law enforcement officer had a sense of her situation and knew, given the circumstances, that she was not likely under that particular bus to get out of the situation. And he dropped her his business card, but instead of having his office number on it, he wrote his personal cell phone. And she kept it, and she kept it, and she didn't get out of this situation. I think she might have fallen under the archetype a little bit more of Molly. And there was a moment, her biggest fear was that the traffickers knew where her son was. And her decisions, as horrible as the day-to-day circumstances were, she felt like she could wake up and deal with them every day, and the thought that her effort to escape would somehow mean her son's life was unbearable. And she got the strength to call that officer on his cell phone. She didn't know what day of the week, but it was a weekend in the evening, and he took the call, and he remembered her. And he doesn't know what to say. She said, "Where are you?" She doesn't know. He says, "Can you find some mail in the house?" And she finds mail, and it was Houston. And he says, "Can I call you back?" And she says, "No, that's not safe, but I can call you back." And so he did. And he reached out, and when she called back, he connected her, that call, to law enforcement in Houston, who gets on the call and says, "Where are you? We want to make sure it's the right house. How are we going to do this?" There were drapes. They said, "Put a shoe in the window." And so she did. She put a shoe in the window. And they came and they got her. And so I was thinking of that law enforcement officer who gave his personal cell phone. And I also was thinking of the bus driver and how many bus drivers who just kind of pushed the scene along. I thought about those individuals in Houston, and I thought about somebody in Indy Anderson who spoke Tigrinya and had a sense that something was wrong and knew that the situation was wrong, and brought the woman into a broom closet. And said, explaining to Tigrinya, "Here, if you work with the police and you run for it, the police will help you. They won't send you back." And she did. And I thought of another individual in Target who saw on Main Street near where I live, who did something similar. So I just wanted to share that there's so much hope and there's so much freedom, and really hats off to the city, hats off to all of you for raising awarenesses, because it really is individuals who step in, who do courageous things, who recognize that the scene is off, and act as that little catalyst to impact individuals.
Thank you for sharing all of that. And I actually, thank you. I actually, when I wrote SIDDHARTH, after I had to view the film before we could decide to screen it, mentioned the quick-thinking bus driver. Out of all the things that impact you in the film, it was really good to know what we can do as community members. If you don't have the position I may have, or if you're not a task force member, the quick-thinking bus driver really struck me too. And I think it's odd with all the things in the movie that are so powerful, but I found that very striking as well. So Patrick, this is also a pre-selected audience question from someone who's seen the film for approvals. We got several emails and calls about people wanting to take photos with you, and all those pre-selected questions didn't make it. But this one did, and it has to do with your character. Ann Archer, same thing for you. So anyway, but you traditionally play a nice guy, such as Bobby Ewing in Dallas. Was it different for you to play an unpleasant character? And one of your lines in the film, it's a long question, I can repeat it if you need me to. One of the lines in the film connected slavery and heritage. What are your personal thoughts on that kind of mindset and whether or not it exists today? So unpleasant character.
That's okay, yeah. I'm still sad that I don't get my picture taken. But, I've spent the last 45 years practicing a philosophy where you take responsibility for your actions, and I find it really interesting that notwithstanding all of the things that we can do by joining organizations or becoming activists or, canvassing your politicians, etc., we have a responsibility in our homes. We have a responsibility to raise our children. We have a responsibility to teach people at the very fundamental age level just the common decency of respecting another human being. I was struck when I heard and then when I saw that last scene where the man drives up in the car and says, "I'll take the little one." That's somebody's husband. That was somebody's child at some point. That man was raised, if you saw him at his job, you'd probably think he was a normal person, but somewhere in there, a derailment happened, and it could have been a very small and insignificant moment, but those are the things we have to be on guard for. We have to take inventory of our actions and how we interrelate with people, including our families, and set the groundwork, set the foundation so that, like Martin Luther King said, that arc of justice, it doesn't make a hard right turn. He didn't say that, but it doesn't make a hard right turn. It doesn't just shift absolutely at any given moment, but it inevitably shifts. And that's what, in terms of taking responsibility, I don't think the world can all become activists, but we can all become active. And I think that's really what I took away from that, and the fact that, I do always play good guys and good heroes. And quite honestly, when they said, "You want to come and be on this part?" I thought, I'm going to save a bunch of people. This is going to be great. The reality was even more rewarding than the initial reaction, which was, I'm glad to represent the reality of society as it exists and what we have to be aware of, both personally and in our environment. And I think that among many lessons in this film, is a valuable lesson to take home with you.
Thank you. And the slavery and heritage mindset?
Well, I think human nature, it is human nature. The interesting thing is it becomes mutated. Everything that you can think of that is a bad response that human beings make, most generally can be backtracked into something that you should admire in human nature. Sexual abuse somewhere down the line, has a root in love and affection, and it becomes mutated, and it becomes bastardized by life experience. Many things you can look that way. Slavery, is another example of when you see interviews in this country in the 1860s and before. A lot of those slave owners thought that they were taking very good care of their people. They were like parental, which is A parental attitude at the right moment is a wonderful part of our human nature. When it becomes mutated and you become blind to the mutation, it creates a problem for the universe. So everything we have to be on guard. You have to take inventory every day. How you doing? What can you improve? And how did I do? And what's my plan tomorrow? And slavery, trafficking, all of those things have the root in basic human nature. And this movie is just putting a huge light on it by which we can trace the genetic heritage back to where we and everybody else can make a change. That makes a difference.
Thank you. Thank you. And Archer, the next question's for you. This is also a pre-selected audience question, so I'll read it. You're the founder of the nonprofit Artists for Human Rights and currently sit on its board of directors. For nearly 2 decades, you've been a vocal advocate for human rights, and specifically the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, no one should be held in slavery or servitude. Could you talk a little bit more about how AHR works in this arena?
Yes, I can talk specifically to what our organization is trying to do, which is to raise awareness of all human rights issues. But it's rather interesting that I do salons at my house, and I invite artists and directors, people in our industry, to come hear someone speak who has an organization or an issue. Maybe they've been through it, maybe they've been a trafficked victim, or maybe they have an organization. It's not necessarily just about trafficking, but it is rather interesting that the main focus of our salons has turned out to be trafficking because it is such a huge issue. It's one of the, I guess it's moving into being the biggest illegal business in the world. The most money made illegally is human trafficking, and it's not getting addressed, and it's getting worse. So we find ourselves doing these salons about it, and SIDDHARTH has been to many of them, and that's how we got to know each other, and I came to be a part of this film. But raising awareness is the answer. If it's under the carpet, nothing will ever happen, and it's films like this that will help. It's all of you talking and working on the issue, as I know you are, but telling others about it and hopefully getting them to see this film. I hope it will have a wide audience and more art. If I like to use the example, Blood Diamond changed the diamond trade. It cleaned it up. De Beers was held responsible, and a film did that. You can change hearts and minds overnight. Films like this can do that sort of thing, and we as artists, if we work together with activists and organizations to raise awareness, I think we can get a lot done. So that's certainly been my purpose. Also, I do think one thing has to be said that's not talked about, and not really addressed in this film because it's such a big subject, but it's the demand. This is a big business because of the demand. So at some point, the buyer has to be held responsible. There have to be consequences. There have to be consequences for buying, as SIDDHARTH says whether it's shame or whether you're booked and you have a record, whether buyers fear their families finding out. Somehow we have to have better laws so that this is a real crime. And I mean, women deserve, children deserve that this is a real crime, and that's a sin that it hasn't been a crime. So,
thank you so much for that. And I do want to add, I think that's a conversation that begins at home and how we raise the people that are living in the homes with us, and maybe even places of worship who I know are represented here tonight, and conversations that need to maybe be had. And Chandler, the next question's for you. The film ends with the survivors transitioning to a safe home. One can imagine that they're then going to begin the very difficult process of rehabilitation, which would of course include case management services, but also meeting their civil legal needs. Could you speak a little bit about the different kinds of services that survivors would need?
Yeah, when I was watching this, I was thinking of an individual we were working with, and we asked her, well, how are you doing and what's the most difficult? And she said, it's those I know I left behind. you know, and it was a girl who actually escaped through kicking out a radiator. But somebody else who had escaped previously was brought back and assassinated in front of the girls. It was a very violent scenario, and so it was very real. And so as individuals are transitioning and they're dealing with the most immediate needs of housing, of safety, you know, it is sometimes the trauma, it is, I think as you said, or Patrick, of, you know, the complete stripping of the human body and the soul through this, which is so dehumanizing that it takes time and resources. So often it is that trauma. And unfortunately for our clients, it is also trying to work with individuals' most immediate safety and security needs for themselves and their loved ones that do not always jive with the legal process. And if I could take this as an example, I'm glad that there was this envelope of debt for some as capsulated in this idea of sleeping with 500 men. Because for us, most frequently, when we talk to women and, well, why did you say, there was the sense that if they continued, they were almost there, and they almost would work off a debt, and then their family, and they would not be in danger. And it was one scenario where the network of traffickers had recruited individuals from Central America who often had family linkages. And a cousin had left, and the way it worked, that if a family member left, and I'm looking at Wafa, who probably will recognize this particular episode and pattern and practice of traffickers, the debt of the family member who escaped went on the individual who remained. And so her debt moved from, you know, and I'm making up this figure because I don't remember, $4,000 back up to $30,000 plus. And she became distraught. She no longer was motivated to work. And the traffickers recognized this. And so in her hotel room where she was kept, the phone rang. And it was the phone of her child, who the traffickers knew where that child was. And the child said, "Mom, I love you. And why are they telling me I have to be careful on the way to school? Why are they telling me to watch for the bus and make sure I don't get hit? Why are they telling this?" And this was a message to her, that we know what you face. So for each scenario, it's very difficult. And in our arena, when we're working with international survivors, the law has, you know, thanks to individuals in this room, the law has really transformed and is so much better than what the tools we had just 5, 10, 15 years old. But still, when it comes to securing family members' safety abroad, that comes at a judicial process, sometimes months, if not years down the road. So we're often working, you know, with relationships and favors and within coalitions to secure safety of loved ones so that those individuals can work with law enforcement and not be living in the trauma that they're not doing what could be done to bring immediate safety to people who maybe were left with the traffickers.
Thank you. SIDDHARTH, this one's for you. The film hinges on a daring escape followed by a criminal investigation. What role can the larger community play? In this audience, some folks have left, but we do have hoteliers, private business owners, health care professionals, law enforcement, and social service agencies that both assist specifically with trafficking and then more broadly as well.
Well, I think we touched on this a little earlier. It has to start with each and every one of you. And I can't stress that enough. NGO workers, law enforcement, activists, government officials, they can't be everywhere at all times, at all. But we can in our communities. And the first step is to be aware of the fact, the truth, the reality that slavery persists and exists, as I often say, hidden in plain sight. It is truly right in front of our eyes. But we're not looking because we don't always know what to look for, or are even aware of the fact that we should be looking. So the first step is for you and your friends and your neighbors and your family members and everyone you know to expand a web of community vigilance, to be the eyes and ears of modern-day abolitionists. And that starts with the list. You can get it from the office of your mayor, of indicators, signs that someone might be trafficked, someone might be held in bondage, servitude. And of course, it's not up to you at that point to go intervene and do something about it. but to refer to your law enforcement, to your city government, to NGOs, so that they can engage in an established, safe, ethical, and very careful way to investigate further. That brings the next element, which is multi-stakeholder cooperation. I know that sounds like some goofy phrase, but it is so crucial that NGOs, activists, law enforcement, the judiciary, and government officials work cooperatively and cohesively, not in silos, because it's in the gaps between those silos that trafficking and slavery slithers through and persists and permeates. So finding mechanisms of cooperation at all levels of society is crucial. And it's not that hard to accomplish once you set your minds to it. And as a city, the city of Houston is actually much further along in that kind of cooperation than many cities in this country, let alone other sectors of the world. So if we start with the mindset that as a community we want to create a web of vigilance, to know what the indicators are, and then to be linked in to our social workers and NGOs, to our government officials, to our law enforcement, and that they then work cohesively and in an adequately resourced and cooperative way, I think you'll find that this current reality, that slavery remains a relatively high-profit, low-risk business venture, and it is a business venture, that reality will slowly shift, and there'll be a tipping point at some point where it becomes inverted, and it becomes a low-profit, high-risk business venture, which will then be much less appealing to the criminals who are currently so heavily involved in slavery around the world, and even here in this country today.
Thank you. This next one is for you too. So I often hear cities across the United States referred to as hubs of human trafficking, including our own city, Houston. Can you talk a little bit more, and you touched on it in your opening remarks a little bit, about exactly how one would go about determining the scope of trafficking in a city? Also, if you could talk about the general state of data, and I know you had a statistic that flashed before the credits about the 100,000 sex slaves in the U.S. If you can elaborate just on research, data gathering, and how some of those determinations are made, that would be great.
Yeah, this is a very important thing, and I included this in my opening remarks, and everywhere I go, wherever I talk, whether it's in this country or other countries around the world, it may not seem important, because the immediate emotional impulse is we've got to rescue these individuals who are held in servitude and bondage and get them out of servitude and into a place of safety, security, and freedom, and that's crucial and important. But an effective and sustained eradication of slavery cannot succeed unless it's based in a sufficient foundation of knowledge. We have a slightly better sense of how many people are trafficked each year across the Nepal-India border than we are trafficked across the southern border of this country. There is such a data gap, a knowledge deficiency in how slavery is functioning in the world today, and we're just really treading upstream until we close those gaps. We understand how many, in what way, where, in what sectors, from where, and by whom is slavery taking place. And this is a function of research, and that means understanding, conducting research to get a sense of, for example, in the city of Houston, how many people are held in slavery and human trafficking? Where are they being held? By whom? In what sectors? It's not just commercial sex, it's construction, it's agriculture, it's domestic work, it's meatpacking, it's all kinds of sectors. But how many? And how did they get here? And what are the gaps and deficiencies and protections that are allowing slavery to take place? This is a function of doing research to understand the molecular structure of slavery so that we can design the vaccine that will eradicate it. And I think that is the crucial gap. Now, having done this for about 16 years, researching and traveling the world, conducting work on slavery, the chief gap at this point is not just raising awareness, but the knowledge deficiency. And I think if there's any hope of finishing the work, as I said, that was begun by Lincoln in this country in the 1860s, it has to be predicated on this knowledge, accrual of knowledge, which will guide and I think be the glue between all of our fragmented efforts to eradicate slavery now.
Thank you very much. That's actually a dream of my office, to get real numbers around this. So that was a question motivated solely by me, but thank you. I do appreciate that. So this will be the last question, and SIDDHARTH will end with you. The film focuses mostly on sex trafficking, but you do touch on labor and even the lesser known form, organ trafficking. So I thought if we could take the last question and have you elaborate on that and use this as an opportunity to educate folks that may not be as familiar with maybe organ trafficking, even labor trafficking, that would be great.
Well, slavers and traffickers have found every conceivable way to monetize the human body. They will force women and children into commercial sexual activity. That could be physical activity, it could be online activity. They have found ways to coerce and force the vulnerable to build our houses and buildings, to plant our crops, to manufacture our smartphones, to stitch our jackets. Every way that you can coerce individuals and monetize human servitude, slavers and traffickers have figured it out. This film, of course, focuses on the singularly most profitable form of slavery the world has ever seen, and that is not an exaggeration. The UN, with some work that I've done with them, we've estimated that slavery generates around $150 billion in profits per year, $100 billion of which comes from sex trafficking. Now, sex trafficking, the number of sex trafficking victims is only about 10% of the number of slaves in the world. So 10% of the slaves are generating 67% of the profits. And that's why criminals are involved, first and foremost, especially organized crime groups, cartels, mafias around the world, in forced prostitution and sex trafficking. But there's an abundant amount of money to be made in harvesting of organs for transplant tourists that will go south of the border. There's an abundant amount of money to be made in coal mining, manufacturing, putting together cell phones, harvesting agricultural products, weaving our clothes, not as much as sex trafficking, but every little nook and cranny of the global economy is potentially infected and tainted by slavery and child labor. And that's to the tune of, as I said, at least $150 billion a year, somewhere between 30 and 40 plus million slaves around the world today. Now that number is a fairly imposing number, 30 to 40 million slaves as a conservative estimate. But as a percent of the human population, it's a fairly small number. Much smaller than the number of slaves as a percent of human population 2 and 3 centuries ago. So what does that mean? That means we've almost finished the fight. It's right here in our grasp. And if we just do the research, raise awareness, engage ourselves, engage our communities, get passionate and get committed about this, we can finish that fight. We can close the circle that was opened in the 1800s. I'll end with just one little anecdote, because I know some of you feel very imposed, very daunted by the size of this task. Everyone around the world tells me this is such a huge issue. It's predicated on poverty, gender bias, ethnic oppression. How are we supposed to, migration? How are we supposed to solve all those problems if they're the root of slavery? In 1787, 12 men met in London with the goal of getting a bill passed in the British Parliament that outlawed slavery. That was at a time when the Church of England had slaves, the Pope had slaves, everyone had slaves. Slaves were probably about 20% of the global economy. Now it's just a fractional percent. They crusaded at a time without social media, without the internet, without planes, traveling ships back and forth across the seas, gathering evidence, gathering narratives, gathering proof that slavery was a fundamental violation of human rights that should not exist in an enlightened world. And it took 30 years, and only one of them was still alive. But in 1807, the first bill abolishing the slave trade was passed in the UK Parliament. A couple of decades later, the institution of slavery was abolished in the UK Parliament in 1837, and then 1865 here, of course, with the leadership of Lincoln, we got the 13th Amendment. So if those 12 men could stimulate a movement that achieved so much, then the couple of hundred people in this room and your web of people can, I think, build a movement with all the tools and resources and power we have today, and we don't have to persuade anyone anymore that slavery is wrong. We just have to finish the fight of eradicating. I think we can achieve this goal, and it's my hope that you'll feel motivated to be a part of that fight, that a film like this, the work that Anne does, the work that Anne does here, the two Annes on either side of me, with a new advocate in Patrick, will spread the message and I think hopefully rid the world of slavery. Thank you.
So that's actually very powerful and the perfect note to end the evening. So I want to thank you all, of course, for being here and making the time to be here. We cannot thank you enough for that and for the roles you played in the film because it is so powerful. Thank you. I want to thank the general audience for making the time to be here. It is a very difficult film to watch. Please think about it, ponder it. You know how to get in touch with me. Feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call. And you also know I'm happy to talk to anybody at almost any moment. So I mean that. I hope you have a wonderful night. And again, thank you for being here.